Okay, let's start out with our prayer for study. In the back of the book. Hopefully everybody had a nice break. Maybe it wasn't really a break. Maybe you didn't do anything but schoolwork at home, but it's okay. Christ my Lord, the giver of light and wisdom, who opened the eyes of the blind man and transformed the fishermen into wise heralds and teachers of the gospel through the coming of the Holy Spirit, shine also in my mind the light of the grace of the Holy Spirit. Grant me discernment, understanding, and wisdom in learning. Enable me to complete my assignments and to abound in every good work. For to you I give honor and glory. Amen. Most blessed Lord, send the grace of your Holy Spirit on me, to strengthen me, that I may learn well the subject I am about to study, and by it become a better person for your glory, the comfort of my family, and the benefit of your church and our nation. Amen. Right. Beautiful. Love that reminder of what we're about here, what we're doing. Okay. We have 2 poems this week, and I feel like they're a lot easier to understand. They're also highly, highly famous and highly, highly memorizable. So if you are still in the market for a poetry project to work on this year, all my kids memorized this particular one, and both of these, and when they were much younger than you guys. So you could do it. Little kids can do it. You can do it, right? I actually want to read them in the opposite order that they are. I'm going to start with the lamb. Pretty sure you're not going to need me to quiz you on the meaning of the lamb. Little lamb, who made thee? Dost thou know who made thee? Gave thee life and bid thee feed by the stream and o'er the mead. Gave thee clothing of delight, softest clothing, woolly bright. Gave thee such a tender voice, making all the vales rejoice. Little lamb, who made thee? Dost thou know who made thee? Little lamb, I'll tell thee. Little lamb, I'll tell thee. He is called by thy name, for he calls himself a lamb. He is meek and he is mild. He became a little child. I a child and thou a lamb. We are called by his name. Little lamb, God bless thee. Little lamb, God bless thee. Right. Is there anyone who's not sure what is being talked about? I feel like this time it's painfully obvious. Oh, cute little lamb. Do you know who made you? He is God who became a lamb for our sakes. Okay, very obvious. So William Blake, let me stop between the 2 poems. William Blake was kind of a little weird. He was very mystical. He was very spiritual, and not always totally, completely Orthodox Christian way with a small o, like not totally always theologically correct. But he wrote two groups of poems, 2 books of poems. And the first one was called Songs of Innocence. Little lamb, the lamb, is from the Songs of Innocence. This might not surprise you. It's a very innocent, sweet-sounding poem. But William Blake noticed that we don't stay innocent, do we? Not for very long in this world. And I mean more than one thing by that. Well, you tell me, we use innocent in more than one way. What is one way we use innocent? If somebody's innocent, they're not what?
They're not like guilty.
They're not guilty. So you go to court, and they pronounce you not guilty. You're innocent. You didn't do it. And of course, none of us are innocent in that way of sin, right? Like, hopefully we are innocent of breaking most of the laws of our country. We are innocent, but not sin. But innocent, like if we say a small child is innocent, do we mean they don't rob banks?
No.
What do we mean?
I mean, they don't know much and they haven't been correct side.
they're uncorrupted as yet. And so, depending on one's theological persuasion, we might think, well, we all come corrupted by sin. Yes, we're all tainted, but, some branches of Christianity is like we're all totally depraved. And some are like, well, God's image is marred in us, but we're not totally lost causes. But at any rate, most of us realize that there's an innocence that hangs around children that is eventually violated when they find out, like, the gruesome facts of life. So my famous, I don't like you guys care, but this story pops into my head every time I think of this. So my oldest daughter was 3-ish, and we were walking around outside. And of course, at this point, she just says, there's a lot of 3-year-old doesn't know about the way the world works, right? So we'd caught a mouse in a trap, and it had thrown its body out because the dog would eat it, or whatever. And so this dead mouse was out there. So she approaches and she wants to touch it. And I remember saying, don't touch it, it's dead. And I remember the blonde hair and the enormous blue eyes that looked up at me and said, what is dead? Like, this is the moment for a parent, like, dang it, here it comes. All the unpleasant stuff I have to explain to this little cute face someday. So as best I can, I explain dead to the big blue eyes, So anyway, this happens to us. So he wrote a companion series of poems called Songs of Experience. And he means the second sort of opposite of innocence, right? The innocent, you don't have experience of the world. And my daughter didn't know, what is dead? What does it even mean? But now she's experienced it. It's that thing. It will never move again. It cannot breathe, experience. So the tiger is our companion. It is a song of experience. It's a little harder, but it's not much harder. Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? By the way, it used to say symmetry, and that makes it rhyme. That's the way you pronounce that word once upon a time, so. In what distant deeps or skies burnt the fire of thine eyes? On what wings dare he aspire? What the hand dare seize the fire? And what shoulder and what art could twist the sinews of thy heart? And when thy heart began to beat, what dread hand and what dread feet? What the hammer, what the chain? In what furnace was thy brain? What the anvil, what dread grasp dare its deadly terrors grasp? When the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears, did he smile his work to see? Did he who made the lamb make thee? Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye dare frame thy fearful symmetry? If you didn't know much about anything, and you saw a lamb and you saw a tiger, would you immediately understand that they come from the same creator, do you think? Do they seem similar enough that, or do they, okay, I know lambs. Oh, look at lambs. They're so cute, and they're so soft, and maybe they're not very smart, but hey, they're just so sweet, and they don't really bite. I don't know if lambs bite. I'm making that part up. And God made you. So isn't God just wonderful? And then I meet a tiger. I hope I do not meet a tiger.
I mean, maybe from like a very far distance, that might be.
Even when you go to the zoo. So I love to look at the big cats in the zoo because it's just so cool because they're cats. I mean, they're so painfully obviously cats, but they're just not any cat you're going to feed kibble to and sit on your lap. No. I want to. I think it would be awesome. I've always kind of wanted to have a pet large cat, but no. It just doesn't seem like the same sort of creature and maybe not the same source. So, we have your creator is called a lamb. He became a lamb for us. And then we have twisting the sinews of your heart, and anvils and chains, and I feel like it's Hephaestus at his forge making a tiger, you know? It just doesn't seem like the same image. What do you think Blake is trying to tell us by putting beside each other the lamb and the tiger?
Is the tiger in the?
No, they're two different, but they're called, yeah, songs of innocence and songs of experience, but they obviously parallel, right? Because we have the creation of a particular animal, but one animal reflects innocence, one reflects experience, yes.
Tiger reflects how the experience of both and how they react and act in society. And with a tiger.
Oh, that's very good, Dominic. So we start out like lambs, but the world turns us into tigers? Perhaps. I mean, we hope it doesn't. But to some extent, I don't know, should I even say this? Can the lamb get along okay in the world all the time? The lambish person? What's going to happen to the lambish person eventually? The tiger's going to happen. Do you think it's interesting? Jesus said to be as innocent as doves, but he told us to do something else too.
To be as strong as lions?
Not as strong as lions, but he told us to be as wise as something, as shrewd, as wise as serpents. Which is kind of weird because in theology, in scriptural lingo, serpent is not good. Generally, serpent is not good. The serpent in the garden is generally serpent is not good. Just like be wise, but be innocent too. And maybe we need a little bit of the tiger. I like that, Dominic. That maybe that is us. Certainly, if we look at the creator of those two things, we need to remember something about that creator. He's the source of the beautiful, cute little lamb frolicking. He's also the source of the tiger. What does C.S. Lewis in the Chronicles of Narnia say about Aslan? What kind of lion is Aslan?
He's an untamed.
He's not a tame lion. He's not a tame God. He's good. He's not tame. Anyway. So anyway, I put these out here for your inspection and perusal and possible memorization. And the lamb isn't even very long. So if you're looking for something. Okay, spend some time with those and think about the differences. And honestly, think about the fact that God is the creator of both of these. I realize that without sin, presumably there wouldn't be predation and, that obviously some animals have to have changed at the fall. But still, does that mean they were ever tame? Just because they might have been good, It's good for us to remember that we have a God who's the God of the lamb and he's also the God of the tiger. Sometimes we lean one direction and we forget the other. So please read those again this week, at least once or numerous times, and think about them. And if you're looking for a good poem to memorize, those are great ones. All right, let's talk about Gulliver. But first, what seems to be the subject of this entire section? What does Swift seem to want to talk a lot about? Or what do we spend a lot of time talking about in part 3?
It's like, in
In Gulliver's Trial, in this whole particular voyage.
it's mostly like science and stuff.
It's very science-y, isn't it? We just have a lot of science. So I have a few questions for us to think about. First of all, what do we mean by science? What do we mean today when we say something is scientific, do you think?
Like factual.
Okay, factual. So, we'll do a test case, all right? So, if I to do a dramatic living out. Okay. So, if I stand over here and I go, abracadabra, and the light comes on, that's one way, right? Do I call that science? What do I call it if I try to do that? I call it magic, right? What did you say? Did you say magic? Did you say? Oh, it was Gabriel. I'm sorry. Say, it's dark. I can't see where the sound's coming from. But if I come over here and I do this, what do we call it? Was that magic? What was it? Because I used science. But I did the same thing, except I didn't actually make the light come on when I said abracadabra. But we're going to pretend I can. Now, what if I can abracadabra and the lights come on, all right, and I amaze you? But then next year they're doing research and they find out that there's something in the sound waves of the sounds abracadabra that stimulates the filaments in the bulbs and makes them come on. Then would it be magic anymore?
No.
So what's the difference between science and magic?
Like science can be like proven, maybe, or like I'm trying to find a way to put it.
But the second one, later we did prove it. Later we proved that abracadabra makes bulbs come on. The sound of those sound
There has
waves.
to be like evidence. I mean, yes, there are certain things you can't test, but like I feel like there needs to be like evidence and like almost like reasons it happens, stuff like that.
Okay, but there was a reason. When I abracadabraed, there was a reason. But what were you going to say, Dominic?
Magic can be disproven pretty easily. Magic can be disproven through facts.
Yeah, or proven. Because in my example, it was proven.
That wasn't magic, that was just science.
Oh, but wait a minute. When I first said it, we all agreed it was magic. I abracadabraed and you all said that's magic.
That's how we thought of things for many centuries.
Okay, but what happened between the year when I said abracadabra and the lights came on and you're just like, oh, Mrs. Ferguson's magic, and then the next year when they found out that, oh, it's just the sound waves.
Knowing how it works.
Knowing how it works. Did you ever think about that? The only difference between science and magic is you know how one works and you don't know how the other one works. It might actually work. I'm not a big proponent of magic in general. But, like Dominic said something, the same thing could be considered magical until you know how it works, and then suddenly it's science. Do you see what I mean? But there's really a fine line because, okay, here's an example. Okay, I'm sorry, just forgive me. All of you forgive me, your families forgive me, God forgive me for using this as an example, but we pray and things happen sometimes. Is that magic? But do we understand exactly how it works? No, because like God knows everything. So he knows everything that's going to happen. So then I pray and something changes. How did I change it? Or did he know I was going to pray? You see, it's kind of fraught with difficulty. And I use this example for a reason. We live among people now that consider that magic. Like Christians who believe they can pray and it will change things. Oh, those darkened minds that believe in magic. That's how the world is seeing Christianity in some circles now. We know it, I would say, works. You know what I mean by that, okay? We know that things have been prayed for and received. We know this for a fact because Scripture tells us. You know, like Hannah prays to have a child and she gets pregnant with Samuel, right? This isn't a prayer, but it is a prayer. Abraham bargains with God over Sodom and Gomorrah, right? And God relents. He's like, okay, if I find 10 good people, I won't obliterate them. He asked. He prayed, right? So it does happen, but we don't know how it happens. And so You know, Jonathan Swift lived at a time when more and more things are crossing over from magic to science. For example, lightning. It's like Thor's hammer and Zeus is throwing thunderbolts, and it's like, oh, it's divine and it's magical and it's mystical, until we find out electricity. You see? But it's still the same. And unfortunately for us, I feel like thunderstorms are not the same anymore, because like, oh, maybe they are for you. Do you ever just watch the lightning?
Yes.
And see the good one? Like, boom, that was a good one. The ones that go all the way down to the ground, and they flash. It still gives us that feeling, but yet, quite frankly, I don't know exactly how lightning works. It has to do with different charges, like positive and negative charges. Okay, this is as far as I need to know. I know sort of how it works. I know there are people who do know how it works. But when Ben Franklin was like capturing electricity in a bottle and flying his kite with his key, it was marginal, right? Like, is it magic? Is it science? I don't know. And they were making all these contraptions to experiment with electricity, and it seemed like magic. But we wouldn't call that magic now. But that's the world Swift was living in. I'm sorry, Dominic, you waited a long time. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that since we know how lightning is objectively more beautiful now, that it's like more natural.
So say that again.
You know that
Because we know that what's happening.
lightning is like how lightning happens is like more natural seeming.
Okay.
Objectively more beautiful.
Do you think it's more beautiful because we know how it works?
It seems like less than the punishment, more like
Oh.
the process of nature.
Oh, yeah. Zeus isn't trying to strike me dead.
Yeah.
That's comforting, I feel like, for all of us. But yeah, sometimes it's nice to have some mystery, but sometimes it's nice to know. It just gives you a fuller appreciation of something, maybe. Anyway, so it's good for us to keep in mind that, you know, there's a fine line between science and magic. Obviously, in the place where Gulliver traveled, they're very interested in knowing the reasons for everything. They are not interested in magic. They're interested in science. What do the people in Laputa, which is the floating island, and Balnabarbi, which is the land underneath, what do they want to do with science? What is science for them? Especially those people in Balnabarbi. What are they doing with it? What do you think, Neil?
Make life easier.
They're going to use it. Does that make sense? So do you remember Descartes? You're like, how can I forget Descartes? I'm trying to obliterate him from my memory, but he just stays. Descartes said something about increasing our knowledge, the sure knowledge. Remember, we're going to have mathematically exact knowledge of everything. And he said it would make us something. Does anybody remember what he said it would make us? Rulers and masters of nature. This is a big difference. So we talked about the fact that all of us, me too, we live in this time and we think a certain way and we don't even realize we think that way. We just do because how else would one think, right? And one of those thinking things that we do is, well, why do we learn stuff? To use it. We learn it to use it. And we forget that for most of the history of mankind, nobody thought like that. It's like you learned it to know it, and because it made you a different sort of person, to know those things. It changed you as a person. That's why we want to know. We want to know about our surroundings because we are a part of it, and it tells us more about us. But then it was, no, we want to learn about electricity so we can harness it. We want to, make green cars or whatever so we can use them and save energy. We only want to use it. This is a very Francis Bacon, Descartes sort of thing for us to think, but we all think it. And so the people in Balnabarbi are just like us, right? Boom, we're going to learn to do all this stuff because make life easier. However, we'll talk about some of these things they want to do, and I question whether or not it would make life easier. But so we want to learn about the world so we can use it. Question. How do we decide whether or not we should? Here's an example. I watched the movie Oppenheimer a few months ago. Maybe some of you heard about this. He was a major mind behind the atomic bomb. All right. This, if you do get a chance to see this movie, it's even Christopher Nolan, who made the movie, he said it's not meant to be history, it's an interpretation, right? And the interpretation, though, is based on the fact that Oppenheimer himself became disenchanted with the fact that he just helped figure out how to blow up enormous numbers of people. And in the movie, and I did look this up, and apparently this is true, in the movie he consults Einstein because they're doing all their mathematical calculations, and there was a marginal chance that when they set off the first one, it could start a chain reaction in the atmosphere and burn up the atmosphere. It was a small chance. And they're like, should we do it? It's like, it's a small chance. It didn't. But,
Thankful.
so, do you see where I'm going with this? What is also necessary? Like, knowledge of science, knowledge of the world is necessary to use these things. But is there anything else we need too, in addition to that? Yeah, Dominic. Go ahead.
About that. I think you're talking about.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I've watched a video essay about that, and apparently people do like 1,000 times hotter in that singular point to actually ignite the nitrogen in the atmosphere. I believe. There's the oxygen. I can't remember exactly how it's explained, but yeah, it is possible, but you know.
But it was minuscule. So it's like, okay, we'll roll the dice, and we'll hold our breath, and we'll set it off, and we'll hope we don't destroy the world.
Yep.
Oh, yay, we didn't destroy the world.
And we're in World War II, or destroy the world.
Yes, yes. So what is necessary to have along with a knowledge of how things work in order to use it well?
To have like
Good.
compassion, like I mean there's the people, like I'm trying to find like a way to put it, but like you have to almost like show like mercy to these people.
Okay.
As well. Like it has to be used like I see why the Americans used it, but also consider how many innocent people that bomb hurt. So there's stuff like that too.
Yeah. So Gabriel's close in on this particular instance, because I heard a moral compass. I heard prudence, and how would that be translated into this particular point? Well, realizing that you've got to weigh the benefits against the cost, and people still, are arguing about this today. Was that a good thing? Was bombing Japan? I say a good thing, but you know what I mean. Were more lives saved? Unfortunately, you never know, right? We can't live in the parallel universe and find out what happened if we didn't and what happened if we did, and then like tally the numbers of dead and how long the war would have gone on. But yeah, so in that particular case, in every particular case, prudence and a moral ethics, what we would call ethics. And we face this a lot in the world, and you guys are going to face it even more than me, because technology keeps advancing, right? And we keep gaining the ability to do things. So when I was young, I was a teenager, I guess, they cloned Dolly the sheep. Like it was the first clone, living clone. They cloned a sheep. The sheep's named Dolly. And it was just a lot of furor about this. Like, oh my gosh. No, now they're going to clone human beings and blah, blah, blah. And some people are like, well, it's a good thing, because what if somebody's going to die and you could have a clone? Like, no, we're playing God. And it's just got kind of murky. But there was a lot of argument about, should you? So we have two things. Can you? Should you? And scientific knowledge tells us the can. But prudence, ethics, adapting our virtues to a particular case, in this case, compassion for the people involved, it tells us the should. And so do the people of Laputa and Balnibarbi have a problem with the can part? Can they do it? Yeah, they can drive a floating island around and all sorts of, but do they have an issue with the should? And well, particularly the projectors. Well, how about we'll save that question until we talk about some of the things they were doing. Oh my gosh. Okay. Then we get to the poo, the promised poo. Okay. So, did anybody notice what Gulliver's job was on the ship this time? I didn't ask you. But I think it's really interesting. He's not just going to be a sailor. He's not just a merchant. He's got an actual job on the ship this time. He's not the captain. The captain came to him, Cornish man, William Robinson, commander of the Hopewell, came to my house. And he said, I had formerly had this job on another ship, and he asked me if I would take this job on his ship. He's the ship's doctor. He's the man of science, in other words. He's the guy with all the medical knowledge. He's ship's surgeon. Where Gulliver picked up how to be the ship's surgeon is unclear. But, so he's the man of science, the medical man on this ship. And, of course, they get waylaid by pirates, and they put him adrift on this island. And lo and behold, an island is floating in the sky towards him, and they let down a rope. And he goes up and visits the Laputians, not the Lilliputians, the Laputians. Describe them. What kind of people live on the floating island? Okay, in what way are they smart, Noah?
Like math and stuff like that.
Okay, they're total brainiacs when it comes to math. And music, apparently. And we were talking about this yesterday. Does anybody, this is just not anything to do with Gulliver's Travels, but does anybody know what math and music have to do with each other?
Yeah.
Tell me.
Like the rhythms and counting the measures.
Counting the measures, the intervals between two notes, whether the notes sound good together or not, is all mathematical. Music is math. And so you might know this, but in the ancient world, the medievals too, 7 liberal arts. There are 7 liberal arts. And 4 of them are math-based. And music is one of them. Music is one of the 7 liberal arts. The 4 math-based one all have to do with number of some sort, with quantity or magnitudes. And music is one of them. So these guys are just brainiacs, mathematical brainiacs. Do they seem particularly wise?
Not so much in certain ways.
What is it like to have a conversation with one of them?
It's just all about math and music.
Well, is it? I mean, what happens when you try to have a conversation with them?
They won't listen to you. You have to like hit them twice before they start talking.
You have to hit them.
Because they're just so busy contemplating. They don't hear anything.
They're contemplating math and the universe to the point where they will not remember they are having a conversation with you. So they hire people with little balloon things attached to sticks to whack them. So the person whose turn it is to talk, they whack him in the mouth, and the person who's supposed to listen, they whack him on the ear, just to remind you, hey, you're talking and you're listening now. And they're the flappers. They're the flappers, and everybody has personal flappers, and it's their job just to whack you on the ear or the mouth to remind you to talk or listen. I don't even know what to say beyond that. It says that, okay, their heads were all inclined either to the right or to the left. One of their eyes turned inward, the other directly up to the zenith. Kind of hurts. Like one turned inward, they're both,
That?
they don't really look at you. They're just looking up.
So like this almost?
Yes, all the time. And then he talks about the flappers. It seems the mind of these people are so taken up with intense speculations that they neither can speak nor attend to the discourses of others without being roused by some external touch upon the organs of speech and hearing. Does anybody remember what they seem to be afraid of? What do they spend a lot of time thinking about? Do you remember?
Like the end of the world.
The end of the world. In particular, does anybody remember how the world is going to end?
The sun would burn out?
The sun is going to burn out, and we're all going to freeze to death, apparently. Or they said also that the Earth very narrowly escaped the brush from the tail of the last comet, which would infallibly have reduced it to ashes, and that the next, which they have calculated for 1 and 30 years hence, will probably destroy us. So they're all the time worried about the sun burning out or being killed by a comet. They're very, very worried about this, and they spend all their time devoted to it. Okay. See if I want to say. Oh, so they want to make Gulliver some new clothes. Remember what they're brainiacs, and they're intensely interested in the end of the world. But it says, during my confinement for want of clothes, oh no, I was right before that. The king, observing I was ill-clad, ordered a tailor to take my measure for a suit of clothes. This operator did his office after a different manner of those of his trade in Europe. He first took my altitude by a quadrant, and then with rule and compasses described the dimensions and outlines of my whole body, all which he entered upon paper. So what do we use? Do you know what a quadrant is? A quadrant is this. Yeah, well, no. Yes. This quadrant is a scientific instrument, but yes, it's a fourth of the XY axis. Okay, but in this case, it's an instrument, and so you sight. You sight on land, and then you sight the sun, and it can tell you what latitude you're at on a ship. It's taking sightings. It's very much like it. They're related. They're related. Okay, and so anyway, so they use like scientific instruments to take his height instead of just getting a measuring tape. And then they use compasses, and like all the circles and to measure him. In 6 days, they brought my clothes, very ill made, and quite out of shape by happening to mistake a figure in their calculations. Yeah, their houses are very ill built. The walls bevel without one right angle in any apartment. And this defect ariseth from the contempt they bear for practical geometry, which they despise as vulgar and mechanic. Well, we don't want to actually, apply it to anything. We just want to think about it. Yes. So they're not, okay, so back to my question. Do they seem to be prudent or wise? They don't seem to be. I feel like anybody who can't actually have a conversation with another human being because you can't think about the fact that you're talking long enough to actually listen and answer probably is lacking in some way. However, we do find out something about their ethics. And, because you mentioned like a moral compass or ethics, how does the king occasionally punish a rebellious city on the mainland? What does he do to him?
Doesn't he like move the flying city like over the flying island over the city and like block out the sunlight?
Yeah. First, we'll just block out the sun until they can't grow any food. If they won't give up, what will we do then? Oh yeah, just drop the whole island on them, smush them like bugs.
This is a very crude idea because then they state all the facts that they can do that.
Yes. And also the fact that in one particular case, people built a pokey tower to keep the island from coming down. This is smart. No. So not only are they not maybe very wise in their use of their technology, we would say, but they're not necessarily ethical in it. Because apparently the king doesn't care if he smushes everybody under his many tons of floating island. Well, they shouldn't have rebelled. Which reminds me a little bit of the Lilliputian king and not of the Brobdingnagian king who doesn't want gunpowder, you know. Well, after a while, Gulliver gets kind of tired. Because nobody talks to him, except the low class. So he decides he wants to go down and visit the mainland. And do you remember, he meets a guy, a great lord at court. He's got these beautiful estates, very prosperous, but what's his problem? Does anybody remember what problem he's encountering? Oh, by the way, one difference between this guy and the king, he tells us that the king had no interest whatsoever in hearing anything Gulliver had to say. He only said, well, what's math like in England? What is the state of mathematics in England? This guy, it says, desired to be informed of the affairs of Europe, the laws and manners of the countries I had visited. He listened to me with great attention and never made use of his flappers.
So he's a little almost like the king of Blefusco in a little bit of a way because of that. Or not Blefusco, Brobdingnag.
Yeah.
I said the wrong.
Yes, no, exactly. Because he's interested. He says, during our journey, the guy said, would you like to go see my country estates? Sure. During our journey, he made me observe the several methods used by farmers in managing their lands, which were to me wholly unaccountable. For except in some very few places, I could not discover one ear of corn or blade of grass. But in 3 hours traveling, the scene was wholly altered. We came into the most beautiful country. Farmers' houses at small distances, neatly built, fields enclosed, vineyards, corn grounds, and meadows. I do not remember having been more delighted by a prospect. His Excellency observed my countenance to clear up. He told me with a sigh that there his estate began and would continue the same till we should come to his house, that his countrymen ridiculed him and despised him for managing his affairs no better, and for setting so ill an example to the kingdom, which, however, was followed by very few, such as were old and willful and weak like himself. Then he tells him the story, well, I had a mill. So that mill, they're going to make me tear it down, you know. They want me to put it up on the mountain and then pump the river up the mountain to the mill, because apparently at high altitudes, the motion of water increases. So we're just going to put the mill on the mountain, pump all the water up, and run it.
I see your problem.
This poor guy said, they're going to make me tear it all down. He's the only guy growing anything, keep in mind. He's the only guy whose houses actually have right angles and, you know. Oh no, they're gonna tear it down. So this is the question I asked you. What are the people of Balnabarby, this land, obsessed with?
Math and music together.
Well, math and music, but what do they want to do with it? Go ahead. Experiment.
Like grow crops much more quickly.
Yes, they're going to make everything better with technology. A better life through technology. This is the motto. He says, these persons, they actually had visited Laputa, and they picked up a smattering of math and stuff, and then they came back down. They began to dislike the management of everything below and fell into schemes for putting all arts, sciences, languages, and mechanics upon a new foot. To this end, they procured a royal patent for erecting an academy of projectors in Legado. And the humor prevailed so strongly among the people, there is not a town of any consequence without such an academy. The projectors. They're coming up with new, amazing ideas. We'll talk about some of these ideas in a minute. But something you should know. Couple of decades before Jonathan Swift wrote this, England started what was known as the Royal Academy of Scientists. The projectors. Isaac Newton was a member of the Royal Academy. I mean, they weren't slouches, but we will see maybe what Jonathan Swift thought of them. You know, these brainiacs who do the world no actual good whatsoever. So this lord, who's the only one who knows how to get anything done, says, would you like to go visit the projectors and see some of their interesting projects? It's like, sure. Can anybody remember any of the projects happening by the projectors? What are the projectors trying to do?
Some are kind of gross.
Some are kind of gross.
Like how they want to cure that dog using like blow
Yeah.
pipes.
We're-
Fill it with air until it pops.
We're going to stick bellows up your rear end and fill you with air to get rid of gases, because we'll just put more gases in. And so they tried it on a dog, and the dog died.
They tried to do it again too.
And they tried to do it again. Yeah. No. Okay, let's just bring the poo in. What do we want to do with poo?
They want to revert it back into its original form.
Turn it back into food. Separate it into its original food components. What the heck? Yeah, those are the highlights. Those are the ones everybody always remembers. But we have extracting sunbeams from cucumbers.
I remember that.
Where would it be easier to get your sunbeams from? How about from the sun? All the time it's shining. Oh, here's a nice one. We're going to build houses beginning at the roof. Much better.
Actually, it is possible. They can build a silo from the
Teaching blind people to mix colors for painters by distinguishing paint by feel and smell. What? Okay. I love this one because this is, we're a rural, even if we don't all live on farms, we are a Midwestern rural people. There was a projector who had found a device plowing the ground with hogs to save charges of plows, cattle, and labor. Here's what you have to do. In an acre of ground, you bury at 6 inches distance and 8 inches deep a quantity of acorns, dates, chestnuts, and other vegetables. And then you drive 600 hogs into the field where they root up the ground in search of their food and make it fit for sowing. What's the problem with this? What, you have to plant all the acorns in the why don't you just plant the plants? Oh my goodness. We're going to feed colored flies to spiders to get them to spin colored silk and make clothes out of it. FYI, does anybody ever try to catch flies? It's not easy, is it? Then we have the bellows up the rear end. Okay. Another projector, by a certain composition of gums, minerals, and vegetables outwardly applied, could prevent the growth of wool upon 2 young lambs. And he hoped in a reasonable time to propagate the breed of naked sheep all over the kingdom.
What?
What do we use sheep for?
Well,
Wool.
you can eat it too.
Well,
You could
yeah,
eat
but
them
there's
too.
multiple uses with like sheep.
We're going to also have a machine where we just have pieces of words and whole words, and we're just going to mechanically choose letters and words until we get some in a row that makes sense, and then we'll paste them together and we'll write books that way. Just by randomly choosing words.
Instead of just choosing.
So of just actually choosing the words. The other project, first of all, we're going to shorten discourse by leaving out all verbs and participles. Because nouns are the only important word anyway. Or better yet, we're just going to abolish words. Does anybody remember how the abolishers of words, how do they communicate with each other?
They hold what they're like what they're saying is like what they're holding.
Yeah. So you have to bring a pack of everything you think you might want to talk about. So you can pull it out of your pack and show people what you're talking. It's hilarious. It's hilarious.
College word.
And I can only picture a member of the Royal Academy reading this book when it was first published and thinking, is this what he thinks we do? Yes. Gulliver, this is another one of the does Gulliver mean it, does Swift mean it moments. It says, this is about abolishing words. This invention would certainly have taken place to the great ease as well as health of the subject if the women, in conjunction with the vulgar and illiterate, had not threatened to raise a rebellion, that they might be allowed the liberty to speak with their tongues, after the manner of their forefathers. Such constant, irreconcilable enemies to science are the common people. Common people are always the enemies of science. They just don't know what's good for them. Does Gulliver believe it?
That story, no. I just kinda like.
Well, here, make sure what we're talking about. Gulliver says, I saw these amazing inventions. But, the common people, they never get on board good inventions. He said, listen to what he said. This invention would certainly have taken place to the great ease as well as the health of the subject. Does he think it's a good idea?
He does.
He does. And he says, but the mob, the rabble, they don't understand. Do you think Jonathan Swift believes that? He's making fun. It's pure satire. He's making fun of these people for thinking it's just the rabble who actually want to talk with their own mouths and tongue and don't want to just carry a pack full of all their worldly possessions so they can talk about them. They just don't know. They just don't understand progress.
Kind of like what you do with the property mag as well, right? Like with that same scenario.
Yes.
They don't work.
Okay, so the last of this sort of general invention, they have a new method to teach students. You write the mathematical formula or whatever you're trying to learn on a wafer. Then the student swallows it upon a fasting stomach, and for 3 days following eats nothing but bread and water. As the wafer digested, the tincture, the writing mounted up to his brain, bearing the proposition along with it. Great. It's so easy. Just write anything you want to learn on the wafer, eat it, but be careful. You have to be fasting when you eat it, and then you can't eat anything but bread and water for 3 days. And then boom, you learned it. Listen to what Gulliver says. It doesn't seem to be working. Here's what Gulliver says. The success hath not hitherto been answerable, partly by some error in the quantum or composition, and partly by the perverseness of lads, to whom this bolus is so nauseous that they generally steal aside and discharge it upwards before it can operate. They run off and throw it up because it's nasty. Neither have they been yet persuaded to use so long an abstinence as the prescription requires. Gulliver says, well, here, it doesn't seem to work, but here's the problem. Students are just not cooperative. They don't fast, and they won't eat bread and water, and some of them just go throw it up because it's nasty. It's obviously the only reason why this doesn't work. Do you think this is the only reason why it doesn't work?
No.
I really don't think that's the main problem. Gulliver thinks it is. The surgeon, the man of science, right? Ship surgeon. It's like, oh, the awesome scientists everywhere. Now, he visits another branch of the projectors, and they're the political projectors. Now, after a while, he mentions some weird things, but at the very beginning of that section, how did their schemes differ from everyone else's? Did anybody notice?
Yeah, they were a little less visionary, is the way to put it.
Okay. A little less odd, do you mean, maybe?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Okay. Did anybody notice another difference? Certainly I agree with Gabriel. A difference in what they wanted to achieve or how they want to achieve it. Let me, yeah, go ahead.
Schemes of persuading monarchs to choose favorites upon the score of capacity and virtue.
Yes. Listen to what the political projectors want to do. He said, in the school of political projectors, I was but ill entertained. The professors appearing in my judgment wholly out of their senses. The guys who stick bellows up your rear end, they're fine. The guys who pull sunbeams out of cucumbers, they're fine. These guys are nutcases, says Gulliver. These unhappy people were proposing schemes for persuading monarchs to choose favorites upon the score of their wisdom, capacity, and virtue, teaching ministers to consult the public good, of rewarding merit, great abilities, and eminent services, of instructing princes to know their true interest by placing it on the same foundation with the people, of choosing for employments persons qualified to exercise them. Is there anything weird about any of that? Is there anything awkward about any of that?
No.
That's the way it should be. And Gulliver says, those people are crazy. They're whacked. They actually want to teach princes to consider the good of their people. That's nuts. They actually want to teach princes to choose courtiers based on merit and ability. Why would anyone do that?
Yeah, it's like also some
Gulliver says they're crazy. Jonathan Swift is playing with us because they're the only people who actually want to do something right. And it says, and they confirmed in me the old observation that there is nothing so extravagant and irrational, which some philosophers have not maintained for truth. He thinks all the things they want to do are irrational. Crazy. It's crazy talk. That the good of a ruler might be the same as that of his subjects. Yeah. And then we do get some weird stuff, though. Like if we have factions, we just take a member of each faction and saw off half their head, and then put half this guy's brain in his head and mix their brains, and let their brains just fight it out in the same skull. You would think so. That might be a problem with that one. Okay, and this one I just want to point out because it was very smooth, and it was so smooth that Jonathan Swift might have lost you. Another group of projectors like, how do we raise taxes? The first affirmed the justest method would be to lay a tax on vices and follies, the sum fixed upon every man by a jury of his neighbors. First guy says, we're going to tax stupidity and vices, but everybody's stupidity level is judged by his neighbors. And then we tax that amount. The second was of an opinion directly contrary, to tax those qualities of body and mind for which men chiefly value themselves, your good points, at the rate to be more or less according to the degrees of excelling, the decision of whereof should be left entirely to themselves. One guy says, let's tax people's stupidity judged by their neighbors. The other guy says, no, let's tax people's virtue judged by themselves. Do you get it? You're laughing, so I think you get it. So who's going to judge you more foolish? You or your neighbor, probably. Like if somebody's going to, your neighbor. Who's going to judge you wiser and better? Yourself or your neighbor? Yourself. So in any way, it amounts to the fact that we always judge ourselves more highly than we should, and we always judge our neighbors more brutally than we should or they deserve. But they all agreed on this. As to honor, justice, wisdom, and learning, they should not be taxed at all. Because they are qualifications of a so singular kind, which means they're so rare. No man will allow them in his neighbor or value them in himself. Nobody will say his neighbor is wise, and when somebody is wise, he doesn't value it in himself. All right, so this is Jonathan Swift poking fun at us. Okay, well, he gets a little tired of the projectors, and he decides he wants to go home. And so on the way to get to a place where a Japanese ship can pick him up, he visits Glubbdubdrib. And in Glubbdubdrib, it's a sorcerer who can call up dead people. You can call up any dead people you want. And I didn't ask you any questions about this, but does anybody remember sort of what he noticed when he looked at all the groups of dead people brought up before him? What's the general rule? Like the rule of the people that not the rule of what they do, but what's the general consequence of talking to people from a long time ago? What does Gulliver notice about them? I think he brings up the Roman Senate. He brings up Caesar and Pompey.
He brings up Alexander the Great and Hannibal.
Yeah. What's true about them all when he compares them to more recent people? Well, they do all have faults and failings. But how do they compare? How does, for example, let's find this. Glubbdubdrib, okay, 221. Okay, for example, I saw Caesar and Pompey at the head of their troops, just ready to engage. I saw the former, which is Caesar, in his last great triumph. I desired that the Senate of Rome might appear before me in one large chamber, and a modern representative in counter view in another. Bring me up the Roman Senate, and bring me up like the English Parliament from 100 years ago. Which one was better in Gulliver's opinion? Do you remember? The first, the Roman Senate, seemed to me an assembly of heroes and demigods. The other, a knot of peddlers, pickpockets, highwaymen, and bullies. Gulliver is struck by the fact that the ancient people seem to be so much better than we are. More virtuous, stronger. Okay, I'm trying to think about it. That was the most forthright place where he tells. Oh, here, he mentions Descartes. We got to talk about Descartes. I then desired the governor to call up Descartes and Gassendi, the scientist. Okay, whom I prevailed to explain their systems to Aristotle. He brings up Aristotle and he tells Descartes to explain himself to Aristotle. This great philosopher, Aristotle, freely acknowledged his own mistakes in natural philosophy because he proceeded in many things upon conjecture, as all men must do. But it said he exploded the ideas of Descartes. He said that new systems of nature were but new fashions, which would vary in every age. And even those who pretend to demonstrate them from mathematical principles would flourish but a short period of time and be out of vogue when that was determined. Descartes and his everything's mathematical. Aristotle says, you're just a fad, you're just a phase. I can blow up your whole theories. So Gulliver looks back and is like, oh, the ancients were giants, like the Brobdingnagians, right? But not literally. And the moderns are small and petty like Lilliputians, right? Okay. On to the Struldbrugs. What's a Struldbrug, and why are they considered unfortunate?
It's because they're immortal, right?
Mm-hmm. They are immortal. And why is that unfortunate?
Well, I mean, even though they're like immortal, they like keep aging, and they eventually just kind of get to the
They
point
keep
where
aging.
it's kind of, where they kind of, well, there's no way to put it.
Yeah, just dwindle away into senile heaps of. What did you say, Dominic? Yes, it's very much like Tithonus. If some of you remember the myth of Aurora and Tithonus, Aurora was a goddess, and she fell in love with the mortal Tithonus, and she asked Zeus, will you make him live forever? Like, sure. But she didn't ask, will you make him not age? So he became older and older and shriveled up till he became like a little cricket or a grasshopper or something. She keeps him in a cage. It's not a happy story. Gulliver, what is Gulliver's attitude when he hears there are people who don't die? Does he think they're unfortunate?
No.
No. What is his plan? If I were a Struldbrug, this is what I'd do. What was he going to do with his life? Yes, I'm going to read all the books in the world. I'm going to learn everything. First, I need to make money, right? I need to make enough money to live comfortably off my interest income or whatever. So then I can devote all my time to learning everything there is to know, and the kings of the world will come to me because of my wisdom, and I will be their advisors, and everybody's laughing at him at this point. Like, buddy, you have no idea. Nobody loves the Struldbrugs. They're old, crotchety, petty, mean, greedy, nasty, and that's the ones who aren't senile or just vicious. Oh, man. Why this? Okay, I'll just ask. Why do we die?
Well, so we can go to heaven, or not just necessarily go to heaven, but essentially move on. So,
But why originally did we start dying?
because of the fall.
Okay, because of sin. We die because of sin. But does anybody remember? God threw them out of the garden, right? With the angel, the flaming sword, the story. He gave a reason for throwing them out of the garden. And it wasn't, they sinned, so I'm throwing them out of the garden. It was, so they don't do this. Does anybody remember what it says in Genesis? Lest they do this, I am throwing them out and setting a guard. No, they're going to die. Because he told them they're going to die. So lest means so they don't. So they don't do this. He said, lest they reach out and eat from the tree of life and live forever. He threw them out of the garden to limit access to the tree of life. And you know what this sounds, I'm reading into it. It sounds like Adam and Eve could have sinned and still reached out and eaten from the tree of life. And God said, lest they eat from the tree of life and live forever, I'm throwing them out. So, this is sort of like something theologians have thought about over the years. Would you want to live forever in a sinful, fallen body? That would be a curse. So what Gabriel said is very apropos. We die, it's punishment. It's also a blessing. Because the alternative is we live in these fallen, sick bodies that keep doing the things we don't want to do forever. That would be awful. It's honestly a blessing. It's a curse and a blessing, because we wouldn't want to live like this. The Struldbrugs live in this fallen world, in fallen bodies, falling apart mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, always doing what they don't want to do, sinning forever. And I think this chapter, and then okay, he meets them, and then eventually he gets back to England. And we don't really see much how Gulliver changes at the end of it. It just says basically he gets home and finds his wife and children fine. But I just thought this was kind of weird. Because Jonathan Swift's doing something to us, for us, with us, right? He's playing games with us, but he's also taking us on a tour, right? And this particular tour was science, 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 and then it's death and afterlife or lack of afterlife. And suddenly sort of, well, smacks me in the face like a flapper. A little bit. It's like, wake up. Science, 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 science. Guess what? Can science fix death? No. You know what? I was unwisely cruising the internet. And I just can't help it because I laugh because I have to watch the comments on things. Why I do this? Don't do it. But I actually read an exchange where people were arguing, they were not Christians, arguing whether or not it would be a good thing to live forever and whether or not science will eventually conquer death. I mean, just this past week, this was being argued on the internet. That it would be good. You know, that's what we want. And that's the whole point of science. And we'll push back the frontiers and we'll live longer and longer and longer and longer until eventually we won't die anymore. And that'll be great. And I feel like, you know, Gulliver is us. Gulliver is those people on the internet. It's like, oh, if you could live forever, imagine all the stuff you could get done. But Jonathan Swift is, whoa, hold on. You don't understand what you're saying. Living forever isn't going to cure sin. Till you can cure yourself spiritually and not become like these decrepit, vicious Struldbrugs, you don't want that. Do you know? It's interesting that all the things we can do with our science, then suddenly we meet death. The thing maybe we don't want to try to do something about. Yes, Dominic.
Set immortality in science, eventually our own atoms would decay, because that cannot be stopped in the physical world.
The people, you know, what's the only entity that is self-sufficient to live forever? God. I mean, they want to be God. Struldbrugs are like we would be if we tried to be God. Right? We'd mess it up. Big time. But this is a really weird section, the part 3, because of the weird stuff he meets. And so here's what I'd like you guys to do for me. You're not writing, you just gave me papers, right? Yes. You did the compare contrast. Excuse me. We're going to start another paper, but we're not going to write it this week, okay? So what I'd like you to do is just sort of make some observations. But somewhere I would like you to write this down. We're going to ask ourselves a couple of questions. Okay, well, just write this whole thing down. How does Gulliver's Travels answer these questions? I'm going to give you 2 questions. What is man? And of course, that means mankind, right? And what should he be? And I'm going to end up having you choose 4 illustrations of what man is or should be. Any 4. And let me show you what I mean. For example, one illustration of what man is man is Lilliputian. Tell me again, what were the Lilliputians like? Just describe them in any way. Think about the things they did. You just compared and contrasted in a paper, so what are they like?
Proud.
They're proud.
Ambitious.
They're ambitious. Are they physically big or physically small? They're insignificant, right? Insignificant. A little petty. I mean, they care about these stupid petty controversies about high heels and low heels and breaking your egg on which end. You see? Is that what people are like? Is that a description of people? Or we have Brobdingnag. What are the Brobdingnagians? We see mostly the court. What kind of people are they?
They're humble.
Despite the fact that they're enormous, right? They don't even recognize the fact that they don't have to be humble, right? They could just go stomping on the earth and smush everybody. Yeah, they're humble. I'm sorry I interrupted you, Gabriel.
Yeah. They're humble. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Thought left.
They're ethical,
Yes.
right?
They make rational decisions.
They make rational, good decisions. They choose court. Now, is this what man is, or maybe what man should
What
be?
man should be.
Yes.
The petty man sees only the very small bad details.
Yes. Petty man sees the bad details, like Gulliver is among the Brobdingnagians. You know, you can only see their mottled skin and their gross mouths and is nasty because they can't see the big picture. They're too focused. Is man a projector or a Lilliputian? Is he just a math machine? I'm just a thinking machine and I'm going to, solve all problems with technology. Is he the master of the universe that can make everything obey his will and extract sunbeams from cucumbers and whatnot? Do you see where I'm going with that? I mean, I'm basically giving you the whole paper here, but that's fine. Because in part 4, you're going to meet 2 more, what is man and what should or what should man be? And they are, I'm not, something like that. That's not it. The Winhams. I want you to tell me if the Winhams, like add this. I want you to just start a chart. So all this stuff, like write down, what are the Brobdingnagians like? What kind of man are they, or what should man be? What kind of men are Lilliputians? What kind of men are projectors? What kind of men are the people on the floating island? What kind of men are the Winhams? It's FYI, the Winhams aren't men at all. But you have to pretend they are. And what kind of men are yahoos?
Yahoos.
This is what I want to talk about next week. And then I'm just going to have you choose any 4, because we'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 7 illustrations. I'm just going to have you choose 4 and just describe them to me and give me examples of what is man according to Jonathan Swift, or what should man be according to Jonathan Swift. So for next week, I want you to read part 4, and I want you to just sort of think back about everywhere you've visited so far with Gulliver. And just, what do we learn about what man is, what he's like, what he's really like, or what he should be like. And I also want you to read one other thing for me. In your reading guide for the next week is a few pages of an essay by Jonathan Swift called A Modest Proposal. And this is just a really wonderful example, it's very famous, of Jonathan Swift at his snarkiest, most satirical. And it is his essay in answer to what to do about the problem of poverty in Ireland. The Irish were just so very poor. And the English said, what's up with those Irish? They're just incompetent. And Jonathan Swift has a lovely idea of how to alleviate poverty and starvation in Ireland. So I would, no, don't say it. I think, yes, if you, some of you I've talked to you about this before, but don't tell anybody. Let people find out how we're going to keep people from starving to death in Ireland. And I don't have any questions about that. Just read it. You will not be sorry that you read it. It will entertain you. And finish Gulliver's Travels and just think about these two questions. According to Jonathan Swift, what have we learned that man is like? Have we learned anything that he should be like? And you can add to it as you meet a couple of more illustrations, all right? That's it. Are there any questions at all? We're actually 8 minutes early. So you have to ask questions. No, you can just leave if you want to. But is there any question? Does anybody have anything? Let me just glance over and see if there's anything else I wanted to say while I've got you. And yeah, I don't think so. I think you guys have been good sports. And if nobody has anything to ask or say, I will let you go. And have a good week. I will see you next time. Goodbye.